Is there anything you would have done differently?
We reported a true story.
Our colleague Brian Williams is back in Kuwait City tonight after a close call in the skies over Iraq.
Controversial Supreme Court nominee Brett Kavanaugh and questions about Kavanaugh's drinking in the past.
Sean Hannity, come on up, Sean Hannity.
Today, Andrew Cuomo is having a moment.
Hi, I'm Chris Stirewalt.
And I'm Eliana Johnson.
Welcome to Inkstained Wretches, where we break down what's going wrong and what's going right with the American news media. Eliana Johnson, I this morning arose to go in and do, let me self-plug first, to do a fascinating interview with David Rubenstein for The Hill Sunday, which everybody should watch this Sunday at 10 o'clock Eastern on News Nation. And as I was getting ready, I went to pop up my podcast list. And what should I find? What should I see but a Wretch's takeover of sorts of Jonah Goldberg's Remnant with Christine Rosen filling in for Jonah and having you as a guest. The worlds collided. There was chocolate in the peanut butter. I couldn't believe it.
Yes, Christine Rosen and I had a lady takeover of the Remnant yesterday.
Amazing.
And it was a lot of fun. So
the Wretch effect is spreading.
The 3 people on earth who just can't get enough of me. I guess that's my parents and sometimes my sister and sometimes my husband. You can listen to the both Ink and the Remnant.
These are what we call super users. We're looking for Eliana Johnson super users, and this is your week. This is your moment. October is kind to you, Eliana Johnson super fans.
All right, Chris, on our front page. What else but the insane drama that has taken over CBS News?
And we should say that we debated before we started recording, do we lead with the news that matters, which is the election, or do we lead with the news that is about the news, the most about the news, the most fascinating? And the CBS story is so revealing and so interesting. How could we resist?
Of course. I mean, I've been following every twist and turn of this story, which we do not expect our listeners to do. So I figured we got to start with the biggest media story, and I will give an overview of it. And that story starts with an interview that was conducted last week on CBS News by morning show anchor Tony Dokoupil. And an important piece of background on him is that he is a convert to Judaism whose ex-wife and children live in Israel. And he sat down along with his co-hosts on that show, Gayle King and Nate Burleson. Am I pronouncing that right, Chris? I know he's a former NFL player.
I believe you.
Okay. So he sat down with Ta-Nehisi Coates, who has a new book out that is an anti-Israel screed and admittedly written after a 10-day trip to the region from the perspective of the Palestinians. So I think
and we talked about the book last week and the controversy it generated. Yes.
I think it's important to note that Coates says the pro-Israel view is well represented all over the mainstream media, the American media. And so his book is an admittedly one-sided account. And so Dokoupil subjected him to critical and tough questioning, which was surprising to many people because of Coates's vaunted status as, I don't know what, how would you describe him?
An anti-racist icon, a darling, I would say. Ta-Nehisi Coates is a darling of the left intelligentsia.
Yeah. So I don't think that many people expected to tune into a mainstream media outlet and see him subjected to tough questioning, but that is what he got. So let's play a little bit of the questions that Tony Dokoupil threw at him.
I imagine if I took your name out of it, took away the awards and the acclaim, took the cover off the book, the publishing house goes away, the content of that section would not be out of place in the backpack of an extremist. And so then I found myself wondering, why does Ta-Nehisi Coates, who I've known for a long time, read his work for a long time, very talented, smart guy, leave out so much? Why leave out that Israel is surrounded by countries that want to eliminate it? But if you were to read this book, you would be left wondering, why does any of Israel exist? What a horrific place, committing horrific acts on a daily basis. So I think the question is central and key. If Israel has a right to exist, and if your answer is no, then I guess the question becomes, why do the Palestinians have a right to exist? Why do 20 different Muslim countries have a right to exist?
My answer is that no country in this world establishes its ability to exist through rights. Countries establish their ability to exist through force, as America did.
But you write a book that delegitimizes the pillars of Israel. It seems like an effort to topple the whole building of it. So I come back to the question, and it's what I struggled with throughout this book. What is it that so particularly offends you about the existence of a Jewish state that is a Jewish safe place and not any of the other states out there?
There's nothing that offends me about a Jewish state. I am offended by the idea of states built on ethnocracy, no matter where they are.
All right, so we learned this week, and this is where the controversy starts, that many staffers at CBS threw a fit and were very unhappy with that questioning and took their complaints to CBS News executives and those complaints culminated in a network call on Monday morning, October 7th, in which the president of CBS News, Wendy McMahon, and the head of news gathering at CBS told network employees that Dokoupil's interview with Coates had violated the network's, quote, editorial standards. And we know that because that was leaked both to Dylan Byers of Puck, but then the audio of the call was also leaked to our friends over at the Free Press. So before we get into the further twists and turns of this, Chris, your thoughts on that?
I want to be charitable here and try to see this in from the perspective of the people who work at CBS. But CBS is, if there is if NBC News is biased in favor of the Democrats, basically, in the same way that Fox is biased in favor of the Republicans, and this is an MSNBC problem, and it's that stuff. If ABC is also sort of conventionally left in the way that places that are staffed and populated by people who graduate from elite journalism schools are, and all that stuff, and people who come from the places that are overwhelmingly Democratic. CBS has a long history of being this is the Dan Rather, this is the 60 Minutes, this is the more progressive, more ideologically left in a more crusading way. And I was not surprised that the sentiment in the CBS newsroom sounded a lot like what we heard in the bad old days at the New York Times when Barry Weiss left, and all of the things that the New York Times has tried to remedy since the Tom Cotton op-ed and the newsroom revolts and all that stuff. So I was not surprised that was the sentiment in the newsroom. What I was surprised by was how thick the bubble is at CBS, because if you look, that interview was adversarial, but Coates is in the light most favorable to Ta-Nehisi Coates he's trying to start fights. He's trying to he's a controversialist, and he's trying to do that. And I was frankly surprised at the thickness of the bubble and how surprised people were that a intentionally controversial author ended up in a controversial interview.
The other thing that surprised me about this was that the interview actually generated buzz and controversy, which would seem like what you want television interviews to do.
Right. It's kind of the idea. And that's what I mean. And also kind of the idea behind Coates's whole shtick, right? That's what he's doing.
At the same time, it remained civil and was, I thought, quite compelling television viewing. So this actually gets more interesting in that after Dokoupil was kind of publicly humiliated and admonished on that call, the longtime CBS legal correspondent and Supreme Court reporter Jan Crawford piped up because the network brass said he had violated editorial standards, but they did not say how. And she piped up and said, I don't understand. What he did was journalism. Somebody came in here with an admittedly one-sided account of a question, and he subjected that person to tough questions. Where did he go wrong? I don't understand. And please explain. And they got flustered and said, oh, we'll call you privately right after this call. And you can hear it all on the audio that the Free Press obtained, and we'll link to that in our newsletter. And that was very interesting. And we'll get to what they have now said, through leaks that he aired in.
Which was that he did not, the way I understand it is that he had, and I did something like this very morning for that Rubenstein interview, which is I sat down with a team of producers and we went over the questions the topics and roughly the kinds of questions that I wanted to ask, because you want them to have the graphics ready. You want them to, and you also want to vet the questions and make sure that they're correct and legit. So one of the hard things about TV is that you're accepting these constraints from a production standpoint, that you can't just sit down and have a freewheeling conversation. You are working as part of a team. And the allegation against Dokoupil was that he had gone off script, basically, and that those were not the questions he had said that he would ask.
Right. So we learned that this went to the Race and Culture Unit that was formed at CBS News in the wake of the 2020 election, and that the network's Standards and Practices Division determined that Dokoupil had not followed the pre-production process, wherein questions are run through race and culture and standards and practices. The following day, he was told that the network would need to address the violation with staff because he didn't run the questions through all these people. I mean, the upshot to me of what happened internally was that, sure, there are these rigid rules, maybe, but clearly this is live television. Nothing ever sticks to the actual script. And these things are only ever arbitrarily enforced when people run and complain that they were traumatized and offended. And one important part of this story that we haven't talked about yet is that CBS, after its call in which it rebuked Dokoupil, announced that they would be bringing in a DEI specialist with a focus in trauma healing, Dr. Donald Grant, to meet with the staff who were traumatized by this interview.
Come on.
When folks online started posting from Grant's Instagram images in which he had compared Tim Scott to Uncle Tom, and Tim Scott actually tweeted at CBS News and said, "You okay, CBS News?" He had also posted derogatory images of Brett Kavanaugh. This was clearly not a down-the-middle kind of guy, as if you could find a DEI specialist who was. They scrapped that plan, and it was pretty humiliating for them. So this clearly, in my reading, was not an issue of Dokoupil having violated their editorial standards. It was an issue of employees being aggrieved and having gone to complain, and network brass having then tried to find a standard or a rule that Dokoupil had violated.
Well, when Gayle King, in her interview of the hostage family, it was fairly early going of the hostage crisis.
Yes, it was the father of an 8-year-old girl. She's since been, she came back to her Israeli family, but she was then held hostage by Hamas. And King interviewed her father.
And I assume that Gayle King's off-the-cuff questions to the father of that child held hostage also were not run through the normal procedure. Selective enforcement of these rules, if it's just a vehicle to say, when we don't like the direction that your questioning goes, we can bust you on this count, is, it's more than unfair. It is the kind of it's the kind of thought policing that leads to a news organization being wildly out of touch with what viewers are interested in and just what a credible person looking at this would think or see.
So the next aspect of this that I think has made this a really interesting and compelling story is that CBS's owner, Paramount News, the controlling shareholder of Paramount, is a woman named Shari Redstone. And she has spent most of her time since October 7th working on anti-Semitism and speaking out against it. And she has come forward to say that Dokoupil did nothing wrong. And we learn that she has called him and told him that she doesn't think he did anything wrong and admonished the CBS network brass for criticizing him. And so now it looks like the question is actually less how much trouble Dokoupil is in and more whether these executives, both the president of CBS News, Wendy McMahon, and the head of news gathering, Adrian Rourke, who came out of local television. They manage local CBS stations. What will happen to them? That is my reading of the situation.
Well, when you have, this harkens back to the Chris Lick CNN problem. CBS has tried over the years. They brought in David Rhodes. They've done a number of things over the years to try to sort of break up the monolithic institutional culture at the network and get different points of view. And I can see how bringing in somebody from the locals would help in that way, right? A way to connect what's going on in New York with what people are experiencing in the rest of America could be good. So, but you always have the same problem, which is when you have an old legacy institution that is hidebound in its ways, bringing change to a place like that is not ever going to be easy.
I think folks at the local level or who come out of that system also have less of a sense of how to navigate and manage these kind of major public relations scandals. And that is where they went wrong here. They had a set of disgruntled employees in New York, basically.
Right.
And now this is a major national news story because of their mishandling of a set of, pissed off 25-year-olds.
They were worried about keeping the peace internally and blew it on the external piece.
Yeah. So that's that. We'll update you guys next week.
And I wonder, by the way, how did this happen? This happened all after the presidential debate or the vice presidential debate?
Yes.
So I would imagine that in a debate that CBS anchored and in which Tim Walz vapor locked and had a poor performance, and JD Vance was generally seen as correctly seen as getting the better of it. I wonder if that hadn't antagonized folks inside the organization.
And we haven't even talked about 60 Minutes.
Well,
which...
it's interesting you would say that because it's time, I believe, to talk about the Kamala Harris media blitz as we move on to 2024 coverage.
Well, Chris, that brings us to 60 Minutes, Kamala Harris's interview on 60 Minutes, and the rest of her media blitz. And it's interesting. There's been so much talk on the right about the editing of the 60 Minutes interview and will they release the full transcript, which I do think they should do. But what really struck me was for all of the editing that was done on that interview, and all 60 Minutes interviews are edited, none of it could make her look or sound good or coherent. So I actually don't think it mattered very much.
Yeah, the edit that Republicans seized on, I don't think made a material difference. It wasn't like she had said one thing and said another. It was it was consistent, and I thought generally it was a credible 60 Minutes interview. We knew it It was tougher than a Steve Croft Obama interview, which
Yeah, I
is
thought the questions were good, and she couldn't answer them.
Well, what Kamala Harris is saying, and she's been on this media blitz, what Kamala Harris is saying in all these interviews, she did Howard Stern, she did something called Call Her Daddy, which I'm not going to listen to or find out about. My spidey senses just say to stay away. But the motif overall is she is asked a question and then she says, I'm not going to answer that question. And the subtext then is, and you're not going to push me on this because you want Donald Trump to lose. And it's pretty brazen, right? It's not a good feeling if you're an interviewer, if somebody basically says, I'm not going to answer your question and you wanted me here. And if you want me to win the election, you're not going to push me on this. You're not going to fight with me. And it's pretty remarkable.
What's remarkable to me is that she doesn't have better answers for the basic questions she knows she's going to be asked. And whether it was 60 Minutes or The View or any of the friendly interviews she's done, how does she not have a better answer for what would you do differently than Joe Biden? It's very easy to have a respectful answer for that,
Well,
which is...
What would you say if you were
I think
her?
it's pretty easy to say, of course, we have differences of opinion. I'm not going to get into the counsel that I provide him behind closed doors, but it's clear we have differences of opinions on many things, and my administration will go in a different direction on 1, 2, 3.
Like
on
what?
immigration.
But that's the thing. Is what
Yeah,
are
but
the 1, 2, 3?
I wouldn't hesitate if I were her to throw him under the bus, to say we're going to have tougher enforcement on immigration policies. We're going to, whatever she wants, whatever it is she wants to say.
So she's dealing with another problem, which is Joe Biden is getting crabby. He is getting very crabby. And I don't want to read too much into it, but the other day when there was the new unemployment number out, Harris was getting ready to kick off a campaign event. I think it was at 2 p.m. And Biden suddenly holds an impromptu press conference right at the time when Harris is getting ready to go on stage. And there's been this behind the scenes reporting in Politico and elsewhere that basically says, Biden's getting mad. He's getting mad. And all of this reporting now that says Democrats are getting nervous. Democrats are getting nervous. There was a piece, an echo of other pieces that was in Axios today. We're recording this on Thursday about, Democrats are getting nervous. And the subtext here is, maybe Biden would have been better after all. And that's certainly a narrative that Joe Biden is pushing. So Kamala Harris has a Joe Biden problem in the sense that he's unpopular with persuadable voters. But she also has a problem with Joe Biden, that Joe Biden is a thin-skinned fellow who obviously is smarting. I mean, he coming out and talking about hurricane relief and, turning it into an attack on Donald Trump and doing all that stuff. Kamala Harris does have a Joe Biden problem, and one that's inward facing.
He's also half dead. It's not like he can vigorously go out and argue with her. And for that reason, I just wouldn't hesitate if I were her to say we're going to go in a different direction on some issues. There's plenty of places in where we agree.
Well, if the way that this election cycle concludes is Kamala Harris and Joe Biden in open rupture, right? So on the one hand, it's good for her to differentiate with Biden and show that there's differences there. I don't think it would be good if it turns into, wow, they actually really do hate each other. And I think the risks associated with that turning into actual rupture. And look, if Joe Biden was cool, he would say anything you need to say. Say whatever you want to say about me, and I'll be just fine. Don't worry about me. History will take care of my legacy.
Yeah, I mean, that is really pathetic. That's pathetic. And it makes it I'm recalling George W. Bush when John McCain was running.
Yes, or in the 2006 election. Yes, very correct.
When I don't think he went to the convention in 2008. He stayed back. Is that right?
Well, there was a storm. There was in timely reference. There was, and was it Gustav? As we gathered in your beloved St. Paul, Minnesota, in 2008, a hurricane was churning up in the Gulf, and this was just 3 years after Katrina. And Bush addressed the convention by a proto Skype, by video hookup, because he said he was going to, stay in Washington and monitor the storm. And it was perhaps an artifice, but a helpful one for John McCain and Sarah Palin.
Chris, what did you make of Trump's rejection of Fox News' invitation to another debate? Reuters reports that Trump said on Wednesday he will not debate Harris again, hours after Fox issued this invitation, and they floated a possible second debate on either the 24th or the 27th of October.
I remain very surprised, or I will end up being very surprised if Donald Trump does not debate again. I think it's the politically correct choice. Nothing is going to happen in a debate that's going to make the difference for Donald Trump, right? We're at the point in this election now where what's left for persuadable voters, 1%, 2%. When James Carville was talking about how scared he is and Democrats panicking generally, her momentum is stalled. Yeah, of course her momentum is stalled. There's nobody left. We're rapidly leaving the phase of the election that is about persuasion at all, insofar as elections these days are ever about persuasion. And this is motivation now, right? When Donald Trump is out saying that they're stealing your FEMA money to give to cat-eating migrants, and when Democrats are emphasizing Trump as a threat to democracy, that's not about persuasion. That's about motivation. That's about getting your people out. And if I was Trump's campaign, I wouldn't want him to debate either. Go to the, as they say in The Godfather, go to the mattresses, right? Get down, get nasty, get gritty, and emphasize ground game and emphasize turning out your base. And I don't think anything that happens in such a debate. And by the way, I expect that Trump would, doing a debate with Bret Baier and Martha McCallum on Fox, looks like to the uninitiated, right? Oh, that should be easier for Trump. Probably hard for Trump because unlike if you do it on, and we talked about how Trump could have avoided the pitfalls he fell into in the ABC News debate. One of them is to say, you liberals, are you going to fact check her? You keep fact checking me. Trump attacking the moderators in a Fox News debate is harder. He doesn't have any problem attacking Fox, but it doesn't land the same way with the audience at home and could hurt him with that very voter motivation that he's looking to do. So I think it's the prudent course for Trump not to debate because the risks are higher for him, especially having lost the first one. But I'm surprised that he is willing to eat crow on this, to have a losing debate and then just bunker in for the last 27 days.
I actually took this as a sign of confidence from the Trump campaign that they are content with the status quo. I think they would want to do a debate to try to change something about the momentum of the race. And that's what she's actually doing with this media blitz. They weren't content with the status quo, which was locking her up in a closet. And they were like, we got to get her out there. We got to shake things up. And they're putting her out on 60 Minutes, on Call Her Daddy, on The View, and trying to change something about what they're doing. And I actually also don't think that's working, but it was an interesting choice. And I think a sort of signal on the part of the Trump campaign. But that does bring us to James Carville panning the Harris media blitz. And he said of it, they need to be sharp. They need to be aggressive. They need to stop answering questions and start asking questions. They're doing all this and sitting down with 60 Minutes and sitting down with Colbert and sitting down No matter what, if I come on your show, you will ask me the questions. If I have a press conference, I get to ask the questions.
Yeah, and I think the wisdom in what Harris did. So there's the good and the bad. The wisdom is she didn't do any interviews, and she just stayed out on the trail and campaigned. And people said, when will she do an interview? When will she do an interview? And then she waits, and then does a bunch. And she does friendlies, mostly, all of varying degrees, and goes on this media blitz to try to answer questions that voters have about her and who she is. And who'd she drink a beer with? She popped the top
Colbert.
on him. Yeah, she'd have a beer with. We're going to
That
drink a
had
beer.
real vibes of, didn't Elizabeth Warren do that with her husband in 2019? She did some ad that was in her kitchen, and she's with her husband.
She posted a video in her kitchen after her announcement.
And it was so awkward.
Nothing could be as awkward as that. But yes, this is the humanizing, and you can get to know her and you can do that part. What Carville's saying is, I agree, which is they have to do their version of what the Trump campaign is doing, which is motivate, stay on the attack and go. This is where we've come to now, the 3-week sprint in which basically you have to go to every Democratic voter in the country and say, and I hate that this is where campaigns end up, but where they say, vote like your life depends on it. You have to vote. If you don't vote, the evil people will win and we will be ruined. And it has to take the fight to Trump and has to stay on the attack, because that's the motivator for Democrats who are uncertain about her, for whatever reservations are there. She needs them to vote with real desperation, which Democrats have done since 2016, right? But they cannot chance it. They absolutely cannot chance it.
Yeah, I actually didn't quite understand the quote we had pulled, but he says, we're just letting go, and I think the whole campaign needs to be much more aggressive and much less passive than they are, which I think gets to your comment on the 60 Minutes interview, which is her posture is basically, I shouldn't really have to answer these questions because he's terrible. And do you want him?
Yeah. And now she has done some interviews, and it can't be said that she hasn't made herself available. And so she's done that. And now speaking here as a political analyst and not a journalist, as a journalist, I hope she does more interviews. I hope she comes on the Hill Sunday. I hope she goes everywhere. But as a political analyst, I would say, now you hunker down. Now you really hunker down and you focus on motivating your base. So speaking of going to unconventional outlets, what about Tim Walz going on World of Warcraft?
So I didn't even follow this. Can you explain this to me?
Well,
once I hear World of Warcraft, there's something in the female psyche that just turns off.
So Trump does Theo Vaughn. Trump does all of this outreach for young men. And so the Harris campaign sent Tim Walz to World of Warcraft. And I have not played World of Warcraft, but it is a very, very, very popular online game played by many, many, many younger men online. And Walz popped in and made himself available to somebody called a guy named Preheat. So he joined Preheat in the World of Warcraft Twitch stream ahead of a rally. So this is when you wonder, why is she doing this? This is the part where you're going after every conceivable voter, and this is Democrats trying to not totally ignore the young men out there who I assume are 70% Trump. I assume that the World of Warcraft, if they vote, which most of them probably do not, but those who do vote are probably overwhelmingly Trump.
Thank you for handling that one. Any World of Warcraft item is not for me.
So there are risks in doing these unconventional things. Trump sat down with comedian Andrew Scholes. They have a popular podcast called Flagrant, and as I mentioned, Trump had done Theo Vaughn, and he's done other YouTuber and that kind of
And
stuff.
these are dude podcasts?
Heavy dude.
Okay.
Dude. This is strong dude energy. And Trump went on, and it was terrible. It was cringy and nonsensical. And at some point during the interview, Trump realizes he's just rambling and not making any sense, and they're kind of laughing at him. And then he's talking about the percentage of presidents who were generals, and he realizes he has lost the thread entirely, and then basically just stops talking, and they're laughing at him. And at one point he says that they lie about him in their ads, and that the government should stop the Democrats from lying about him in their ads. And then he says, I have a hard time doing it to them because I'm basically a truthful person. And then his interviewer just laughs out loud, cannot help himself laughing. And you see Trump, who doesn't, Trump's 77 years old. And he doesn't, throughout the interview, he's not sure whether they're laughing at him or laughing with him. And you can tell that Trump feels unsafe as it's going on. And so I guess the point here is, you want to go on World of Warcraft, you want to go on the podcast Flagrant, you want to do all of that stuff. Fine. You got to hustle, leave no vote unturned. But also, there's risks associated with this. If you go on Call Her Daddy and you're running for president, you're also going to have gone on something called Call Her Daddy. And these interactions are appealing to campaign operatives because of the audiences that they have, and everybody's made a play for this stuff, but it's not without risk.
Chris, you flagged an Axios piece. Potential Trump loss threatens destruction of modern GOP, and they write why it matters.
An alert Wretches listener sent this to me, and it's by Axios and someone named Zachary
Basu.
I don't want to be unnecessarily unkind, but you know what? It seems dumber because of the Axios prompting. I will say that in the defense of the writer of this piece, that the Axios, Be Smart, why it matters, the big picture, and all of their template definitely makes it look stupider. But the amazing thing about this piece is, here's one of the takeaways. If Donald Trump is defeated in next month's election, the Republican Party will face a reckoning unprecedented in modern political history. Never before has a party been so deeply entwined with the fate, fortunes, and flaws of one man. 4 consecutive poor election cycles would unleash a wave of sustained scrutiny that the GOP, as it currently exists, may not survive. Really? Do you think that if Donald Trump loses this election, that the Republican Party will cease to exist? Now, I'm here to tell you, there's a better chance that the Republican Party will eventually cease to exist if he wins, not if he loses. If Donald Trump loses this election, do you think, I watched Ron DeSantis doing press conferences ahead of the arrival of the hurricane this week. You know what he looked like? He looked like the next president of the United States, right? He looked like, you're like, oh yeah.
Christine and I were talking about this yesterday, and that Vance at the Republican vice presidential debate and DeSantis down in Florida gave folks a good sense of what might come after Trump.
It was 6 years from Richard Nixon's resignation to Ronald Reagan winning a landslide victory. This is a preposterous way of thinking. And the reason it's a preposterous way of thinking is that it supposes that parties have an ideological core that they must
Trump
adhere
himself has shown that not to be the case.
Exactly. And the people who, now the dangers for Republicans in a Trump loss, of course, would be the way that Republicans will conduct themselves in that loss, that if they don't accept the results, if there's violence again, if there's whatever. Yes, certainly, you could have a situation spiral out of control and leave the party in the wilderness for a long time. But guess what would happen if Kamala Harris loses? If Kamala Harris loses, the freak out on the progressive left from the people who, like Elizabeth Warren and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who are tutting her on Lena Khan and the progressive agenda against big business and all of this stuff. If Kamala Harris loses after bragging about her Glock ownership and changing her position on fracking and cracking down on the border, if she loses, the revolt on the Democratic left will put to shame what we saw after Hillary Clinton lost, right? The backlash that drove Democrats to trouble, right? The trouble for Democrats was after Biden won, he was dealing with a very demanding progressive side of his party that wanted everything and wanted it now. And he succumbed to that pressure. And as a result, look, I think Joe Biden's age would have eventually pushed him out of this race, whatever the case, but drove his numbers down and changed the character of his presidency profoundly. What do you think those same folks are going to say if Kamala Harris loses after aggressively moderating throughout that brief general election campaign? Give me a break. And my point to this Axios piece and about why I got up my nose so much, other than the Axios prompts, reality check, these parties have very short memories. They have very short memories, right? You get one or two cycles where you're getting over what was in the past. But if Donald Trump loses in a way that Republicans accept, and it's at whatever point that's over, Donald Trump will be as much forgotten by Republicans as Richard Nixon was by 1984, right? 2-3 cycles later, it's all over, right? And people say, "Oh, I forget where I was on Trump. I'm not even sure I supported him." They will say, but for Republicans, it's exactly the other way around. The problems for Republicans will be more intense in a Trump victory than they would be in a Trump loss.
Chris, up next, we have business news.
Oh, yeah. I wanted to get your take on this. I found it interesting.
So the British Telegraph is up for sale, and we learn from Yahoo Finance that the New York Sun owner, David Efune, is nearing a deal to buy it. And Yahoo reports the British foreign businessman has tabled a competitive bid understood to be worth about £550 million. Remarks posted on social media site X over the Israel-Gaza conflict and Mr. Afuna's pro-Israel stance have come under scrutiny, while the UK regulators will likely be looking at any potential impact of a takeover on the newspaper's editorial independence. Mr. Efune has not commented publicly on his involvement in the auction process or his reasons for tabling a bid. My guess would be there's a long way between tabling a bid and a done deal on this. And I think it would be useful to have a pro-Israel owner of a newspaper in the increasingly anti-Israel UK.
And the Telegraph, AKA...
It's a very influential newspaper in London.
AKA the Torygraph. This is the Conservative Party newspaper in London, and very influential, sort of the Wall Street Journal effect for British politics.
Yeah, so we'll see if this gets done. I think my guess is there are many steps between here and a closed deal.
And you worked at the Sun in New York,
I worked at the
right?
Sun in a different iteration. The Sun is online only now, and I worked there when there was a newsroom back in 2006. And there was a print copy and a big printer in the middle of the room. And maybe it wasn't a printer, but there was a big piece of machinery in the middle of the room. And anyhow, there were print copies distributed all over New York City. So it's a little bit different now, but yes, it was a wonderful experience. So I'm all for this.
I love it.
Chris, that brings us to our obsessions of the week, where we break down the stories we can't get out of our head. And mine my obsession was CBS, okay? But we had to lead with it, so mine is admittedly a little bit lighthearted.
Well, we need some style. We need some style.
Okay, and I'm combining styles. So I don't know if this is really an embarrassing admission, but it is an admission that I go on Instagram and I follow all these fashion, accounts, and I have been seeing these really cute handbags on there that are all kind of long. They're like sort of long and lean and sleek. And this is like all I look at, plus home renovations and home decorating on Instagram. And then I go to the New York Times and I see an article that says introducing the Dachshund bag, which I had no idea this had a name. A growing number of brands have embraced a new handbag shape that evokes the skinny, elongated bodies of wiener dogs. And that is exactly the shape of this bag.
Whoa.
But you got to click on it because they're really cute. And I do not own one, but they are all over the gram. I'm not on TikTok, so I'm sure they're all over there, but I am not and will never be. So the Times writes, over the past year or so, a growing number of brands have embraced a new handbag shape. It's neither bowler nor baguette, not a satchel or a saddle. Skinny and elongated, it has a figure similar to that of a hot dog bun or a wiener dog. You should call it a dachshund bag. I think it's the newest, freshest shape we've seen in the market in the last 3 to 4 years, said Will Cooper, the senior vice president for women's designer clothing, shoes, and bags at Saks Fifth Avenue. It feels like something people don't already have in their wardrobe. And the Times writes that Mr. Cooper said the recent crop of dachshund-shaped bags were noticeable without being logo-focused, placing them somewhere between styles associated with the quiet luxury trend and others with heavy branding. These are still sophisticated and understated, but not in a quiet way.
So do you have
really
one,
cute.
or are you going to get one?
No. I don't have one. I'm not going to get one. They're like little dachshund. They don't fit a lot, so they're not super practical, but they're like cute for a night out.
All right. My obsession comes from my American Enterprise Institute colleague, Roger Pilkey, who is a Substack human, headline Weather Attribution Alchemy. And it was very useful and very helpful for me. So both Republicans and Democrats have a narrative that they want to spin about the Hurricane Helene and the wreckage that it brought to the Carolinas, Georgia, and Tennessee. And also, I assume it looks like things were not as bad for Tampa as we had originally feared with the most recent hurricane. But the narrative from Republicans, some say that they control the weather and direct these hurricanes, I guess, at Republican localities to suppress the vote. Sure. And then there's other misinformation, disinformation. There's other lying about how the hurricane response has gone, but to weaponize the hurricanes against Democrats. And this is something that I don't know whether Hurricane Katrina was the first example of this stuff, but certainly it's the most effulgent. Hurricane Katrina, political utility of politicizing storm recovery efforts. And I mean, I know of lots of examples that I can go back to from history, going back even to the 19th century. So it's not brand new, but certainly since 2005, it's been a feature of our politics. But Democrats have a narrative too that they want to push, which is it's Republicans' fault because they're failing to control the weather because they're not taking urgent enough action on climate change. And Roger writes, the underlying theory of change here appears to be that people must be fearful of climate change and thus need to come to understand that it threatens their lives, not in the future, but today and tomorrow. If they don't have that fear, the argument goes, then they will discount the threat and fail to support the right climate policies. Hence, from this perspective, the IPCC's failure to reach strong claims of detection and attribution represents a political problem, a problem that can be rectified via the intervention of extreme event attribution. So a report comes out And it fails to deliver on the theory that progressives and many on the left want, which is storms are getting worse. If you ask any Democrat, they will tell you, almost any Democrat, storms are getting worse because of climate change. And the data is inconclusive, right? The data don't make that case in a way that would be politically useful for advancing these agendas. Here's what the IPCC said. Scientists cannot answer directly whether a particular event was caused by climate change, as extremes do occur naturally, and any specific weather and climate event is the result of a complex mix of human and natural factors. Instead, scientists quantify the relative importance of human and natural influences on the magnitude and or probability of specific extreme weather events. So unsatisfying to people who want to write headlines like one of the ones that Roger puts in this piece, dangerous climate changes here now. And there are many problems with this. There are many problems with this way of being. But one of the core problems, of course, is if you're really worried about climate change, if you continue to mislead people about the realities of climate change, you're going to have an even harder time getting them to adopt normal policies. And I've many times before made the comparison that climate change for the left is like the debt and deficits for the right, which is they say, no one's looking, it's going to kill us, it's going to kill us. And then normal voters say, should we do something about it right now? Yes, we should do something about it right now. Well, what should we do? Well, it's going to hurt. And they say, let's wait. Let's wait. Now is not a good time to do a hard and painful thing about this. So let's keep going. We're getting away with it. Let's keep going. And when you mislead people about this stuff, you make it harder for people to have grown-up conversations about mankind's effects on the atmosphere and on our weather. This was right up my alley. It was a good and wholesome obsession, and I recommend it to everybody.
All right, Chris, that brings us to my favorite time of the week, which is reader mail. And we have an international edition of reader mail. A note from Hunter Hustis.
Hutis.
And I guess it's pronounced Hutis, okay?
Yes.
Because he's writing from Stockholm, Sweden.
Yeah.
And he says, Dear Wretches, why do almost all anchors hold a pen in their dominant hand? I've asked AI, but get the incredible response that they need to be ready to take notes during the show. I have only seen that happen once. It seems an obvious prop. As it's ubiquitous, it must be mass hysteria or backed by some focus group finding. I find it distracting and irritating. I do not find that it makes them more serious or trustworthy. Chris, I'm actually interested in your opinion on this because I have a thought.
Okay, well, I sometimes hold a pen, and obviously I would hold it in my dominant hand if I was holding a pen. I sometimes hold a pen during an interview if I am going to make notes. But usually during an interview, I'm rearranging my cards, right? So I have the team I work with provides for me note cards with biographical information about the person I'm interviewing, potential questions, information. And so in the breaks, I'm trying to maintain eye contact. And then when the other person's talking, I'm going to look down and I'm going to reshuffle my cards. I'm going to get rid of the ones that I know I'm not going to need. I'm going to move up a card that I think I might need. I'm not a pen clutcher.
This is really interesting because when I was practicing for the
News Nation
Republican
debate,
primary
the very
debate,
successful News Nation debate,
I got feedback on the movement of my hands, which I do movement when I talk, and most people do. And some of the feedback that I got was you should hold a pen in your hand. And people said that it looked more serious and natural to do that.
Well, it's something, when I go over to do segments at the big board, to stand there in front of the data visualization wall, I find it helpful to carry note cards with me or have papers with me so I have something to do with my hands so that they're not akimbo or distracting. It gives me a little security blanket that I can hold on to. So maybe for anchors, holding onto a pen, it's not that it makes them look more serious. It's that it's just someplace to park your hand.
It is. And then the feedback that I got actually was that it prevents your hands from looking like they're flailing around a little bit.
Right. Yeah.
Like it keeps your fingers in a stable position.
Yeah. I think it's an elimination of distraction.
Yeah.
More than it is an effort to be serious.
Anyhow, I'm very sorry, Hunter, if this irritated you or distracted you during the News Nation debate, because this was the feedback that I got from the pros. So, Chris, that brings us to our favorite items of the week, where I am forced to say something nice, but I have a great favorite. So go ahead.
So Matt Iglesias, this is a Substack-leaning episode for me, but Matt Iglesias is Substack Slow Boring. He writes about something we've talked about. It was a favorite because I agreed with it, so it must be really good. that headline media organizations are blowing their endorsements, and we had talked about. I grabbed this, or this grabbed me because we had talked about the Scientific American endorsement of Kamala Harris. Like, gee, you think? And he writes, I wouldn't even say that a science magazine, to quote, stick to sports he's talking about, but they should think about what they're doing. Well-reported and fair article about Trump versus Harris on funding for scientific research could be politically impactful. Don't say impactful, say effective, please. Or if you want to find one particular member of Congress in a tough race to single out as a science hero, someone who people in the overlapping circles of interested in science and interested in liberal politics might want to support, that would be useful information. But just reiterating standard liberal criticisms of Trump does not provide any new information to swing voters about Trump. What it does is inform people that the staff of the magazine are all liberals, and thus non-liberals should perhaps ignore them. Amen. This is where it's at. It's a great piece. I recommend it.
Chris, my favorite item was a Washington Post piece on Israel's pager operation that it ran against Hezbollah. And this piece revealed that Hezbollah actually paid Israel for these pagers, which I loved.
They made a buck.
They made a buck on this. And the Post writes, the detail that I loved in this piece is that Hezbollah actually paid Israel for these pagers. They made money on this, in addition to maiming and killing Hezbollah operatives. So the Post writes, for 9 years, the Israelis contented themselves with eavesdropping on Hezbollah, the official said, while reserving the option to turn the walkie-talkies into bombs in a future crisis. But then came a new opportunity and a glitzy new product, a small pager equipped with a powerful explosive. In an irony that would not become clear for many months, Hezbollah would end up indirectly paying the Israelis for the tiny bombs that would kill or wound many of its operatives. Because Hezbollah leaders were alert to possible sabotage, the pagers could not originate in Israel, the United States, or any other Israeli ally. So in 2023, the group began receiving solicitations for the bulk purchase of Taiwanese-branded Apollo pagers, a well-recognized trademark and product line with worldwide distribution and no discernible links to Israeli or Jewish interests. The Taiwanese company had no knowledge of the plan, officials said. The sales pitch came from a marketing official trusted by Hezbollah with links to Apollo. The marketing official, a woman whose identity and nationality officials declined to reveal, was a former Middle East sales representative for the Taiwanese firm who had established her own company and acquired a license to sell a line of pagers that bore the Apollo brand. And so it goes.
We're gonna build a wall and make Mexico pay for it. Has
amazing.
nothing on. We're going to build a bomb and make Hezbollah pay for it. Amazing.
Amazing story. That is all the time we have for the news about the news. If you have a story you want us to talk about, email us at wretches@nebulouspodcasts.com and sign up for our newsletter at nebulouspodcasts.com. This has been Ink Stained Wretches from Nebulous Media, produced by Colin Chicola. Find us on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. Just search for Wretches.